Sup bitches? I'm reliably informed that I'm terrible at pimping my stuff. So here I am, pimping my stuff in what's hopefully an amusing way. If you want to interact with me and follow me, you can find me on Twitter at Grinosaur and at Mort_post for official announcements. Today I'm going to review Perfect by Joe McDowell, though maybe not Joe McDowell. And before I get into this review, and I realise it's got a green cover so it's going to disappear slightly, before I get into this review I want to run a quick little test with you. So I want you to form a picture in your mind of the person who designed this when I describe it to you. It has glowing reviews from people like Fred Hicks. It's about a steampunk dystopia, but it's light on the steampunk. You play rebels, but according to some interpretations, you are rebels who cannot help but be rebels by who you are, and that your very existence is inherently criminal. It's GM-less, though a GM is extremely helpful. It's an indie darling. The author doesn't properly capitalise the D in McDowell. Okay, so just take that image. It's indie darling RPG, well regarded by the sort of main voices in the indie RPG movement. In your mind, hold the kind of person that might create such a game. Think about that for about 30 seconds. If you guessed any of the following, award yourself 50 internets for each one. But I'm not saying this to be mean. I've pointed out other stereotypes about gamers and games designers before. I'm saying it to point out that there is this stereotype, and that really it shouldn't be so predictable from what you do, who you are, what you look like. It shouldn't be so predictable, the political positions and so on that you hold, because games exist in the realm of the imagination where you're free to explore new ground and do new and different things. Part of the reason that I put forth the image that I do is due to the experience of meeting stereotypical game designers in the past and being quite disappointed that the image didn't match up to the work. But we seem to have a reverse situation here, unfortunately. Now, as Bregman says in his 9th commandment, come out of the closet, don't be ashamed to do good. I believe in trans rights. I have helped fund people for transition. I've helped fund and provide equipment for disabled trans people. When I run my scholarships, I seek out people that need the help, and that has included trans associated people in the past. I do that with my normal work as well. I try to give jobs and give money to the people who need it, so I'm by no means an enemy of this community. Whatever the fuck queer means anymore, I'm not so sure about. But still, it's easy to see either way coming from this what this game is about, at least in broad terms. And this idea of being inherently criminal, inherently illegal would seem to match up to a lot of certain pseudo-left ideological positions, many of which are quite reasonable positions if applied and acted upon reasonably. Enough preamble. This is technically a GM-less game, though it benefits hugely from having a GM to play the authorities and to act in an impartial manner. Supposedly, it is about being someone who is inherently criminal due to what they are in this dystopian steampunk society. And this dystopian steampunk society is one in which a dying queen left a final command, even though she hadn't really said anything much for the rest of her life, that the world should remain as it is, remain unchanged. And it's a very sort of stereotypically buttoned up, tied down, circumspect Victorian society, where sexuality is pushed to the fringes, where any kind of wild behaviour is frowned upon, where the people are very tightly constricted, at first by social convention and then by law, and so on. It's walled itself off from the rest of the world. It wouldn't be too out of place being an imaginary country in that Frankenstein game, whose name escapes me for the moment, which is embarrassing because I wrote a short story for the collection. But yeah, it wouldn't seem too out of place being a location in a lot of other dystopian steampunk games. Now, all of this might sound like I'm trying to put you off, but there is the core of a good game here, and I have actually played it at IndieCon some years ago now. The guy who was running it, or introducing us to it, didn't do a particularly good job explaining exactly what it was, other than steampunk dystopia and you're playing criminals. He didn't really convey the idea that we were rebels, or that the reason we were criminals was due to something inherent in us, like we liked creating art, or we had a fringe sexuality or anything like that. He didn't do a very good job explaining that. So me and the other guy who were playing it, I decided to play a criminal mastermind and a foreigner who had somehow infiltrated the country, and he chose to play a serial killer, which isn't the kind of thing that they actually mean. So we had a very weird experience with a very frustrated GM desperately trying to get across the themes of the game and us bucking against them, or at least in some ways showing how they're flawed. But that is a problem with the background, right? I'm not sure how to put this in a way that is not going to come across to certain people as bigoted or problematic. Suffice to say, that's not how I intend it. But from the review and from some of the text, the idea is that you are inherently criminal due to what you are, but that's not really the way in which crimes tend to work, nor the way in which they can even be enforced. So let's say that you are a homosexual in a country where homosexuality is illegal. You are not inherently illegal most of the time for being a homosexual. You break the law by engaging in homosexual acts, right? And that is oppression, and it's pointless. You're not doing anybody any harm. Yeah, it's a horrible thing, but you're not inherently criminal. It's not until you do something, even if that something is entirely justified and doesn't hurt anybody and is perfectly right in a moral and ethical sense, if not a legal one. You know, if you just refrain, you're not going to get in trouble with the authorities, and that's a big part of where the game perhaps falls down. Obviously, you want a story, so you're going to do things, and that is going to lead to pushback from the society and the powers that be within it. But there is nothing inherent in you that means that you have to, and so that premise is kind of flawed. Paranoia, in a way, does that better, because being a mutant is treason, being a member of a secret society is treason, and yet every character starts out with a mutation and as a member of a secret society. You can't really do that in this to the extent that you can say that you are inherently illegal. So that's a flaw in the system. The setting itself also isn't particularly suited to group play. It's much better suited, I would say, to one-on-one play, because while you can draw other people at the table into your stories, it tends to be more of a shifting spotlight game. So the spotlight will be on one player while they do their crime and deal with the aftermath and so on, and then it moves on to the next one. There isn't a great deal of call, a great deal of need, a great deal of any sort of obvious way in which other characters would get drawn in. So I think the background is stultifying The politics isn't quite as overt as a lot of other more modern games are, and you can have fun with it. We certainly had fun, albeit at the Games Master's expense, when we played actual criminals in the world setting. And that's where I think the real value of this book lies. It's not in the setting, which is staid and dull and boring and doesn't really allow for truly dramatic or interesting shifts in the society. It's very personal and character-led. You don't feel like even if you succeed, you can shift this monolith of a society around you, which is kind of the opposite to something like Underground, where being able to change the world around you was integral to the kind of downtime and background skills. So it's not there that you'll find the value, unless maybe you want to take this setting and use it as something to airdrop into your own game as a weird little country somewhere, probably in Europe about the size of Luxembourg or something. Then you might find some inspiration. But the real value is in the system around the crimes and the follow-up to that. Other games do dystopias better. Other games do inherent illegality better. Some games do drive to do these things better. If you permit me a moment of egotism, I think Actual Fucking Monsters does what this game is trying to do at its core a lot better. But the rules about investigations and being caught, blowback about that, that's all very useful and something that could be extracted and used in other games to help define and decide whether the authorities catch up to your players when they get up to some shenanigans. But you could probably narrow that down to a couple of pages if you really wanted to slim it down. Right. So the normal stuff about games. Style. Shit cover. It's not 1990 anymore. The green marble and blood doesn't really cut it. The interior art is a mix of old public domain Victorian illustrations and a few spot sketches here and there, most of which aren't particularly great, others of which do evoke more of an interesting idea of the setting, but there's not enough of that. Though you could probably look to something like Dishonored and the concept art for that to get an idea and a feel for what they're kind of going for, but there weren't enough statement pieces. The layout is otherwise, pretty standard, pretty easy to read. Style overall, though, I'm just gonna have to give it a 2, given the unengaging nature of the writing and the rather patchy art. It doesn't convey its setting well enough, I don't think, to really excite you or interest you in what it has to say. In terms of substance, the system's reasonably solid for what it does, and it does have that useful, extractable bit of system. If you like GM-less games, story-driven games, it might appeal to you. If you want to do play by email with someone, with them representing the authorities and you being the rebel, it would be a good bet for that, or for forum play, because it's very structured. So in terms of substance, I'll probably give it about a 4. So that gives it a total overall of 6 out of 10, or 3 stars out of 5. Useful fodder, predictable, not as good as other games that tackle the same subject. But it was for the criminality rules, the organisation and secret society rules, that I picked it up, even after such a disastrous game. So it's worth it on that basis. It's one for gaming academics and game designers. Zang.
In his house in R'lyeh, great Cthulhu lies dreaming, and when he awakens, he shall have the morning wood of aeons. Call of Cthulhu is a deeply pornographic card game. Enjoy your tentacles.